The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of proud families filled the seats, their faces beaming with anticipation. I smoothed down my dress, the nicest one I owned, purchased specifically for this day. My hands trembled slightly as I checked my appearance one last time in my compact mirror. At 65, the years of working 3 jobs had etched deep lines around my eyes, but today, they crinkled with pride. "Mrs. Gagnon, would you like some water?" asked the young usher, noticing my nervousness. "No, thank you, dear. This is a big day." I smiled, tucking a stray gray hair back into place. 28 years of sacrifice had led to this moment. When Oliver was born, I promised myself that he would have opportunities I never had. His father left when Oliver was only 5, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. I still remember that night, sitting at our kitchen table after Oliver had gone to bed, calculating how I could possibly make ends meet as a single mother. That was the night I decided I would do whatever it took to give my son a better life. The next day, I picked up my first extra job. Years blurred together after that. Early mornings cleaning offices, days as a receptionist at the local clinic, and evenings waiting tables. Even on my most exhausted days, I'd still find time to help Oliver with his homework, beaming with pride as his grades improved, and his dream of becoming a doctor took shape. When Oliver was accepted to medical school, it was the happiest day of my life. I took on a 3rd job. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. My body ached constantly, but the thought of Oliver in his white coat kept me going. Now, as the ceremony began and the graduates filed in, I searched for my son among the sea of identical caps and gowns. When I spotted him, my heart swelled. He looked so handsome, so accomplished. I'd done it. Despite all the odds, I'd helped my son achieve his dream. The dean's speech faded into the background as I watched Oliver, remembering the little boy who'd played doctor with his teddy bears. I barely noticed the tears streaming down my face. After the ceremony, I pushed through the crowd, eager to congratulate my son. I spotted him surrounded by a group of well-dressed students and their families. I waved, catching his eye. The smile he gave me wasn't the one I'd expected. It was brief, almost embarrassed. I hesitated, but continued forward. "Oliver," I called, reaching out to hug him. He stepped back slightly, maintaining some distance between us. "Mom, hi, you made it." Something felt wrong. The warmth I'd always known in his eyes was missing. Before I could respond, a sleek, elegant woman in her 40s approached our group. Her designer dress probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She placed her hand possessively on Oliver's arm. "Darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. Oliver's face lit up in a way it hadn't when he'd seen me. "Everyone, this is Amber," he announced proudly. Then, the words that shattered my world. "This is my mother, the woman responsible for who I am today." The group murmured appreciatively, complimenting Amber on her son's achievement. I stood frozen, invisible. Amber smiled graciously, accepting their praise without correction. One of Oliver's friends turned to me with a puzzled expression. "And you are—" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Oliver glanced at me, then quickly said, "This is Holly. She's a family friend. She's been very supportive." A family friend? 28 years of sacrifice reduced to family friend? The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The chatter around me faded to a dull hum as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I looked at Oliver, my son, my whole world, standing there with his arm around this stranger he called mother. In that moment, I felt something inside me break, but also something else ignite. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I have something important to say." All eyes turned to me. Oliver's face paled. Amber's perfect smile faltered. What I did next silenced the entire group. "Actually," I repeated, my voice growing stronger, "I'm Oliver's mother, his biological mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Oliver's friends looked between us, confusion evident on their faces. Amber's perfectly manicured hand fell from my son's arm. "Holly," Oliver said through gritted teeth, Perhaps we should discuss this privately. I think we're well past privacy, don't you? I replied, surprised by my own boldness. For 28 years, I've been washing dishes and scrubbing floors to put you through school. I've worked 3 jobs since you were accepted to medical school. My hands are rough and my back is bent, but I made sure you never went without. I turned to the group. I'm not looking for sympathy, but I won't be erased. Not today, not after everything. Amber cleared her throat. Oliver has been living with his father and me since he was 17. We've supported him through college and medical school. Supported him? I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. With what? The money I sent every month? The loans I'm still paying off? A flash of something, guilt perhaps, crossed Oliver's face. His friends shifted uncomfortably. Mom, please, Oliver whispered. Amber's husband, my stepfather, paid for my undergraduate degree. They've helped me, and I'm grateful for that, I said sincerely. But that doesn't erase the 17 years before that. The nights I held you when you were sick. The baseball games I never missed, even when I had to leave straight from one job to get there. The science projects we built together on our kitchen table. I reached into my worn purse and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Do you remember this? You drew it when you were 9. Oliver's eyes widened as I unfolded the crayon drawing of a stick figure in a doctor's coat. Above it, in a child's uneven handwriting, when I'm a doctor, I will buy my mom a big house so she doesn't have to work anymore. I kept it all these years, I said softly. It got me through the hardest days. The group had fallen completely silent. Amber looked away, her perfect composure finally cracking. One of Oliver's friends, a young woman with kind eyes, reached out and squeezed my arm gently. Then Oliver did something unexpected. He stepped away from Amber and moved toward me. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I didn't think. That's right. You didn't think, I said, not unkindly. But I need to know why. After everything we've been through together, why would you introduce her as your mother? Why would you reduce me to a family friend? Oliver's answer stunned me. Because I was ashamed, he whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. Ashamed? Of me? He looked down. Not of you, exactly. Of where I came from. Of our tiny apartment. Of your 3 jobs. Of how hard everything was. These people, he gestured to his friends, they come from money, from prestige. Their parents are doctors and lawyers and business owners. And I wanted to belong. So you borrowed someone else's mother? I asked, my voice barely audible. Amber and Richard took me in after Dad reached out to them. They gave me a room in their mansion, introduced me to the right people. It was so much easier than our life. I'm sorry, Mom. I wanted to be someone else. The truth hung in the air between us, raw and painful. In that moment, I saw my son, not the proud doctor in his graduation gown, but the insecure boy who'd always felt like an outsider. I took a deep breath. I understand wanting to be someone else, Oliver. There were many days I wanted that too. But do you know what kept me going? Being your mother. That was the one thing I never wanted to change. Tears welled in Oliver's eyes. Several of his friends had moved away, giving us space. Amber stood awkwardly to the side, her perfect facade now completely crumbled. Mrs. Gagnon, said one of the young men who remained. I'm James. I've been Oliver's roommate for 4 years. He extended his hand. It's an honor to meet the woman who raised such a brilliant doctor. Oliver has told me about your sacrifices. I shook his hand, confused. He has? James nodded. Many times. Late at night, when we were studying for exams and everyone else had gone to bed, he would talk about you, about how you never gave up on him. I looked at Oliver, who couldn't meet my eyes. Then why? I asked him. Why this charade? Before Oliver could answer, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached our group. He put his arm around Amber's waist. There's my graduate, he exclaimed, clapping Oliver on the shoulder. The newest Dr. Mitchell. I've already spoken to Dr. Harrington about a position at his practice. Top dollar, son. He noticed me and extended his hand. Richard Mitchell. You must be one of Oliver's instructors? Before I could respond, Amber placed her hand on her husband's arm. Richard, this is Holly. Oliver's mother. Richard's smile faltered. His mother? But I thought, it's complicated, Amber said quickly. Richard looked between Oliver and me, confusion evident on his face. Oliver, what's going on here? My son finally looked up, his expression unreadable. Richard, there's something you need to know. Something I've never told you, or Amber. The tension in our small circle was palpable. Whatever Oliver was about to reveal, I had a feeling it would change everything. Richard, Oliver began, his voice unsteady. When my father reached out to you 8 years ago, he didn't tell you the whole truth. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? Your father and I were college roommates. He told me you needed a place to stay while you finished high school, that your mother, he glanced at me apologetically, was struggling to make ends meet. That much was true, Oliver said. But Dad didn't reach out because he cared about my well-being. He reached out because he needed money. Amber's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up. Oliver, what are you saying? Oliver took a deep breath. My father has never paid a dime of child support. He abandoned us when I was 5 and didn't contact us again until I was 17. When he suddenly reappeared, I was so happy. I thought he'd changed, that he wanted to be part of my life again. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering how excited Oliver had been when his father called after 12 years of silence. How eagerly he'd gone to meet him at that diner. He told me he wanted to help me achieve my dreams, that he had connections who could help me get into a good college, Oliver continued. Then he introduced me to you and Amber. But what you don't know is that before that, he came to our apartment and asked my mom for money. I felt all eyes turn to me. Harrison, Oliver's father, showed up one day out of the blue. I explained quietly. He said he was in trouble, that he needed $10,000. I didn't have it, of course. I was barely making ends meet. When I couldn't give him what he wanted, he stormed out. The next day, he called Oliver directly. Richard's face had grown increasingly grim. Go on, he said to Oliver. Dad made a deal with me, Oliver said, his voice hollow. He would introduce me to his successful friend who could help my career, but in exchange I had to help him get money from that friend. Amber gasped. Are you saying Harrison used you to get money from us? Oliver nodded miserably. At first, it was just supposed to be a college fund he could borrow from. But then he started asking me to request more. For textbooks, for rent, for medical supplies. I did send some of it to him, but not all. I was caught in the middle, trying to please my father while also not taking advantage of your generosity. And your mother? Richard asked, nodding toward me. Where was she in all this? I never told her, Oliver admitted. I was embarrassed, and I didn't want her to know I was in contact with Dad again. She'd worked so hard to protect me from him. I felt my heart breaking all over again. All those years, Oliver had been carrying this burden alone. Why didn't you tell us? Amber asked. We would have helped you without Harrison's manipulation. Because by the time I realized what was happening, I was in too deep, Oliver said. And then I started to enjoy the life you offered. The nice house, the connections, the ease of it all. It was so different from what I'd known. I convinced myself that it was okay, that I deserved it after all the years of struggle. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. And I started to resent you, Mom. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you reminded me of everything I was trying to escape. The poverty, the struggle, the feeling of never quite measuring up. His words cut deep, but there was a truth in them I couldn't deny. When did you last have contact with your father? Richard asked, his lawyer's mind clearly piecing things together. 3 months ago, Oliver answered. He called asking for more money, said he had gambling debts. When I refused, he threatened to tell you everything. I've been terrified ever since, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard's expression softened slightly. Oliver, you're not the first young person to be manipulated by someone who should have protected you. But the deception has gone on long enough. He turned to Amber. We need to talk privately. Amber nodded, her usually confident demeanor subdued. She looked at me with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite read. Holly, I never meant to. I didn't know. It's not your fault, I said. surprising myself with how much I meant it. You've been good to my son. That's what matters to me. As Richard and Amber stepped away to talk, I was left alone with Oliver. The graduation celebration continued around us, but we stood in our own bubble of painful truths. I don't know what to say, Oliver whispered. I've made such a mess of everything. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me. All these years, carrying this alone, I was protecting you, he said. At least that's what I told myself. But I think I was really protecting the image of myself I was trying to create. The successful doctor from a respectable family, not the kid whose mom cleaned houses to make rent. I reached out and took his hand. It was still the same hand I'd held crossing streets, bandaged after falls, and finally, shakily, watched sign medical school application forms. Oliver, do you know what I see when I look at you in that graduation gown? I see the most incredible success story. A young man who beat every odd stacked against him, who worked himself to the bone, just like his mother, to create a better life. But I lied, he said. I betrayed you. I used Richard and Amber. Yes, I acknowledged. You made mistakes, big ones. But today isn't the end of your story. It's just a chapter. What matters is what you do next. Oliver looked over to where Richard and Amber were deep in conversation. I think I've just lost the only other family I had, he said quietly. I followed his gaze and saw Richard nod firmly as Amber wiped away a tear. They began walking back toward us, their expressions resolute. Whatever happens, I told my son, you haven't lost me. You never will. Richard reached us first, his face serious, but not angry. Oliver, he said, Amber and I have made a decision. My son straightened his shoulders, preparing for the worst. I understand. I've betrayed your trust, and I accept whatever. We want you both to come to dinner tomorrow night. Richard interrupted. There's a lot we need to discuss, and some changes that need to be made. But the most important thing is that we clear the air and move forward honestly. Oliver stared at him in disbelief. You're not cutting me off? No, Amber said, stepping forward. But we are going to have a very frank conversation about everything, including your father's involvement. And Holly, she turned to me, genuine remorse in her eyes. We owe you an apology. We've unwittingly been part of causing you pain, and that was never our intention. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. For now, Richard continued, I think this young man needs to have a long overdue honest conversation with his mother. We'll see you both tomorrow at 7. As they walked away, Oliver turned to me, his expression a mixture of relief and trepidation. Mom, there's more I need to tell you, about Dad, about everything. The graduation crowd had thinned, most families now heading to celebratory dinners. Oliver and I found a quiet bench in the corner of the reception hall. I'm listening, I said, preparing myself for whatever painful truths were still to come. Oliver took a deep breath and began to speak words that would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I knew about our past. Mom, Oliver began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. There's something I've never told you about the night Dad left. I tensed. That night had been the dividing line in our lives, before and after Harrison's abandonment. I'd spent years trying to shield Oliver from the worst of it, but clearly there was something I'd missed. I was supposed to be asleep, he continued, but I heard you two arguing. I crept down the hallway and watched through the banister rails. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering that terrible fight. Harrison had emptied our bank account. Again. When confronted, he'd raged, calling me controlling, nagging, impossible to live with. Dad was shouting that you were holding him back, that he could have been successful if it weren't for us, Oliver said. And then he saw me watching. You didn't notice, but he did. My heart caught. What happened? After you went to the kitchen, he came over to me. He knelt down and said, Your mother is the reason we're poor, Davy. Remember that. She's going to keep you down just like she did to me. One day, when you're older, I'll come back for you. We'll show her. I felt the blood drain from my face. He said that to you? You were 5 years old. Oliver nodded. Those words stayed with me, Mom. Even though I knew how hard you worked, there was always this voice in the back of my mind, Dad's voice. telling me that somehow our struggles were your fault. Is that why, when he came back into your life, I couldn't finish the thought. Part of me was still that 5-year-old desperate for his approval, Oliver admitted. When he contacted me at 17, he played on exactly that. He told me he'd made something of himself, that he could help me do the same if I got away from our life. The pain of this revelation was almost physical. All those years I'd thought I was protecting Oliver, and he'd been carrying this poison inside him. After he connected me with Richard and Amber, I saw how easy life could be. Oliver continued. Clean, comfortable, prestigious. Dad encouraged me to spend more time with them, to present myself as, well, not as your son. He said it was my chance to trade up. Trade up? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. His words, not mine, Oliver said quickly. But I was young and impressionable, and Richard and Amber were so different from us. They traveled internationally, knew important people, lived in a world I'd only seen in movies. Dad convinced me that this was my chance to reinvent myself. So when you started spending weekends at their house, Dad was orchestrating it all, Oliver confirmed. He told me what to say, how to act. He said if Richard and Amber saw me as part of their world, they'd invest in my future in ways you never could. I flinched, and Oliver reached for my hand. I know now how cruel that was, he said. But at 17, looking at medical school costs, I felt trapped. Richard offered to help with tuition, and I took it. I started living a double life. Their surrogate son on weekends and school breaks. Your son in between. And Richard and Amber had no idea about any of this? About your father's manipulation? Oliver shook his head. They thought they were simply mentoring a promising young student. They knew I came from humble beginnings, but I let them believe my mother, you, was unstable, that you couldn't provide a suitable environment for my studies. Each revelation was like another knife to my heart. And the money? You said your father was taking it? Not all of it, Oliver said. Richard set up a fund for my education. Dad convinced me to ask for extra, claiming it was for living expenses, research materials, professional clothes. I'd withdraw cash and give it to him whenever he showed up. How much? I asked. Over the years? Probably close to $50,000. I gasped. Oliver, that's theft. He manipulated you into stealing from people who were trying to help you. I know, he said miserably. At first, I was too afraid to refuse him. Later, I was too ashamed to admit what had been happening. And through it all, Richard and Amber treated me like their own son. They took me on vacations, introduced me to their friends, celebrated my achievements. It became easier to live in that world than to face the truth. And where does that leave us? I asked quietly. Where does that leave 28 years of sacrifice? Oliver's eyes filled with tears. When I saw you today, standing there in the dress I knew you'd saved for months to buy, all my worlds collided. The person I pretended to be for Richard and Amber couldn't exist in the same space as the son you raised. So I made a terrible choice. I chose the lie. He covered his face with his hands. The moment the words left my mouth, I hated myself for it. But I couldn't take it back without exposing everything. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of deception hanging between us. Where is your father now? I finally asked. I don't know, Oliver admitted. After I refused to give him more money, he disappeared again. His phone is disconnected. I'm afraid he might show up at the dinner tomorrow, trying to get to Richard. I straightened my shoulders. Let him try. It's time for the truth. All of it. Oliver looked at me with something like wonder. How can you be so strong? After everything I've done, everything he's done. Because that's what mothers do, I said simply. We keep going. We face whatever comes. And we never, ever give up on our children, even when they give up on us. For the first time since the ceremony, Oliver really looked at me. Not through me or past me, but at me. I never deserved you, he whispered. That's not how love works, I told him. It's not about deserving. We left the reception hall together, walking slowly through the campus where Oliver had spent the last 4 years. The spring air was warm, filled with the scent of new beginnings. "What do we do now?" Oliver asked as we reached my old car, parked between shiny SUVs and luxury sedans. "Now we go home," I said. "We get some rest. And tomorrow, we face Richard and Amber together with the truth." Oliver nodded, but there was still uncertainty in his eyes. "And what if he shows up? Dad, I thought of Harrison, the man who had abandoned us, who had poisoned our son's mind, who had exploited everyone who cared about Oliver. Then he'll finally have to face what he's done," I said with quiet determination. "All of it." As we drove away from the university, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. The truth was finally emerging after years in darkness, but some truths come with a price. What I didn't know then was that the most shocking revelation was still to come. The Mitchell estate was exactly as Oliver had described it: sprawling, elegant, intimidating. As we approached the massive front door, I smoothed my dress nervously. It was my second best, saved for special occasions. "Ready?" Oliver asked, looking as anxious as I felt. "Together," I replied, squeezing his hand. Amber herself opened the door, dressed more casually than at the graduation, but still impeccably stylish. "Holly, Oliver, please come in," she said warmly. The inside of the house was a testament to wealth and taste. Soaring ceilings, museum-quality art, furniture that probably cost more than my car. Yet Amber led us through to a cozy sunroom at the back of the house, where Richard waited with a bottle of wine and 4 glasses. "I thought we might be more comfortable here," she explained. "Less formal." "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative of the gesture. After we were settled with drinks, Richard cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. Amber and I have discussed this at length, and while we're deeply hurt by the deception, we also recognize that Oliver was very young when this began and under the influence of his father." Oliver stared at his untouched wine. "That doesn't excuse what I did." "No," Richard agreed, "but it helps explain it. Now, I think we need to lay everything on the table. No more secrets." For the next hour, Oliver recounted the full story: Harrison's abandonment, his reappearance, the manipulation, the money. I added details where I could, filling in the blanks about our life before the Mitchells. Amber listened with growing horror. "All these years, I thought we were helping you build a better future. I had no idea we were being used to fund Harrison's gambling addiction." "Not everything was a lie," Oliver said earnestly. "The gratitude I felt for your guidance, the respect I have for both of you, that was always real. You showed me a world I never knew existed, and you believed in me when I needed it most. But at what cost to your relationship with your mother?" Richard asked, looking at me. Before Oliver could answer, the doorbell rang. Amber frowned. "We're not expecting anyone else." A moment later, their housekeeper appeared at the sunroom door. "Mr. Mitchell, there's a gentleman at the door insisting on speaking with you. He says he's Oliver's father." The room fell silent. Oliver's face drained of color. Richard stood. "Show him in, Martha. It's time we met the man behind all this." Despite my years of imagining this moment, nothing prepared me for the sight of Harrison walking into the room. Time had not been kind to him. His once handsome face was bloated, his expensive suit worn and rumpled. But he still carried himself with the same arrogant confidence I remembered. "Richard! Amber!" he exclaimed, as if greeting old friends. "Sorry to crash your dinner, but when I heard my son was—" He stopped abruptly as he noticed me. "Holly? What are you doing here?" "She's here because she's Oliver's mother," Richard said coldly. "His real mother, in every way that matters." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I see Oliver's been telling tales." "Not tales, Harrison. The truth." "Finally," I said, finding strength in the support of the people around me. Harrison's false charm vanished. "Whatever he's told you, it's not the full story. Holly here was always trying to turn my son against me. When I finally reconnected with him—" "Save it," Richard interrupted. "We know everything. How you manipulated a 17-year-old boy to extract money from us. How you poisoned him against his mother. How you abandoned them both when Oliver was 5. Harrison's gaze darted around the room, looking for an ally and finding none. Even Oliver, who had once been so desperate for his approval, now looked at him with clear-eyed contempt. "Fine," Harrison spat. "So I took advantage of an opportunity. You people have more money than you know what to do with." And the boy needed to toughen up, learn how the real world works. "The real world?" I echoed in disbelief. Oliver watched me work 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. "Don't talk to him about the real world." Harrison turned to Oliver. "You ungrateful little, after everything I did to give you a shot at a better life." "You didn't give me anything," Oliver said, his voice steady. You took money, you took my trust, and you tried to take my relationship with my mother. But you failed." "Is that so?" Harrison sneered. "Then why did you introduce Amber as your mother yesterday? Seems to me like I succeeded perfectly." Oliver flinched but held his ground. "That was my mistake, my weakness, not your success. And it's over now." "Over?" Harrison laughed. "Nothing's over. I'm still your father. You can still leave," Richard interrupted, standing. "Now, before I call the police and report the financial fraud you've been orchestrating." Harrison's face contorted with anger. "You think you can threaten me? I've got nothing to lose, Richard. If I go down, I'll make sure everyone knows how the great philanthropist Richard Mitchell was duped for years, how he tried to buy himself a son." Amber stood now, too. "No one was trying to buy anything, Harrison. We were trying to help a promising young man, something his actual father should have been doing." "This is pointless," I said, rising to my feet. "Harrison has never taken responsibility for anything in his life. He's not going to start now." Harrison turned on me with a vicious smile. "Speaking of responsibility, Holly, why don't you tell them all your little secret about why I really left?" The room fell silent. I felt my heart begin to pound. "Mom?" Oliver looked at me, confused. Harrison's smile widened. "See, Richard, the story Holly's been telling isn't quite complete. She likes to paint herself as the martyr, the abandoned wife who sacrificed everything for her son. But she never mentions the real reason I walked out." "Don't," I whispered. "Holly had an affair," Harrison announced triumphantly. "With my best friend. I found them together. That's why I left, because she betrayed me first." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of a secret I'd carried for decades. "Mom?" Oliver's voice was uncertain. "Is that true?" I looked at my son, at the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Yes and no," I said quietly. "I did have a relationship with Thomas, but it wasn't an affair." "What does that mean?" Amber asked gently. I took a deep breath. Harrison and I were already separated when I met Thomas. Harrison had walked out on us after emptying our bank account, not for the first time. He was gone for 3 months with no word, no money, nothing. I thought he was gone for good. "Separated isn't divorced," Harrison cut in. "You were still my wife. A wife you abandoned," I replied. "Along with your 5-year-old son." I turned back to Oliver. "Thomas was kind, stable, everything your father wasn't. He helped us when we had nothing. And yes, I fell in love with him. For the first time, I thought we might have a chance at a normal life." "Then what happened?" Oliver asked. "Your father came back," I said simply. "He found out about Thomas and flew into a rage. He threatened to take you away from me, said no judge would give custody to an adulteress. I was terrified. We had no money for a legal battle, and in those days courts often favored fathers, even absent ones. So you chose me over Thomas," Oliver said slowly, understanding dawning. I nodded. "Thomas wanted us to fight, but I couldn't risk losing you. So I ended things with him. And then, a week later, your father left again anyway. This time for good, or so I thought." Harrison scoffed. "Playing the victim again, Holly? Touching." "Why didn't you ever tell me about Thomas?" Oliver asked, ignoring his father. "At first, you were too young. Then, after Harrison left, it seemed pointless to bring up more pain. And as the years passed, I don't know. It became this secret I kept, thinking I was protecting you." Amber looked at Harrison with undisguised contempt. "So you abandoned your family twice, held a relationship over Holly's head that began after you'd already left, and then poisoned your son's mind against his mother? And you have the audacity to stand here and act self-righteous?" Richard placed his hand on Harrison's shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave. Now." Or what? Harrison challenged. Or I call the police, Richard said evenly. Financial fraud carries serious penalties, Harrison. And I have excellent lawyers. Harrison's bravado faltered. He looked around the room one last time, his gaze lingering on Oliver. You'll regret this, son. Choosing them over your own father. The only thing I regret, Oliver said, is that it took me this long to see you for who you really are. Harrison's face hardened. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. We heard the front door slam moments later. In the silence that followed, I felt something shift between us all. A clearing of the air. Painful but necessary. Richard was the first to speak. Well, that was illuminating. I'm so sorry, Oliver said, looking between Richard and Amber. For everything. Amber moved to sit beside him. We were all deceived by Harrison. And while I wish you'd been honest with us from the beginning, I understand why it was difficult. What happens now? I asked quietly. Richard leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. First, we need to make sure Harrison can't continue to exploit anyone. I'll have my legal team look into the money he took. It may be difficult to recover, but we can at least ensure there are consequences. And as for us, Amber added, looking between Oliver and me, I think we need a fresh start. All of us. Oliver looked up, hope cautiously dawning in his eyes. What do you mean? Holly, Amber said, turning to me. You've spent 28 years sacrificing everything for your son. I've known him for only 8, and while I care for him deeply, I never intended to replace you. I'm sorry if I ever gave that impression. You've been good to him, I said sincerely. That's what matters to me. Richard cleared his throat. Oliver, Amber and I still want to support your career, but from now on, everything needs to be above board. No more secrets, no more lies, and no more hiding your mother, Amber added firmly. Holly is an extraordinary woman who deserves recognition for everything she's done. Oliver looked at me, tears in his eyes. Mom, can you ever forgive me? I reached for his hand. I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean we don't have work to do. We need to rebuild what your father tried to destroy. The dinner continued late into the evening. As we talked, a new understanding began to form between us all. Richard and Amber weren't trying to replace me. They were simply people who had grown to care for my son. And in their own way, they had helped him achieve his dreams. As we were leaving, Amber pulled me aside. Holly, I have a proposition for you. I run a foundation that supports medical care in underserved communities. We need someone to coordinate our volunteer program, someone organized, hardworking, and who understands sacrifice. Would you be interested? I stared at her in shock. Me? But I don't have the qualifications. You raised a doctor while working 3 jobs, she interrupted with a smile. I'd say your qualifications are beyond impressive. Think about it, please. On the drive home, Oliver was quiet. What are you thinking? I finally asked. About Thomas, he said. Do you ever wonder what happened to him? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I admitted. He was a good man. We should find him, Oliver said suddenly. I'd like to meet the man who was kind to my mother when she needed it most. I glanced at my son in surprise. Really? You'd want that? Mom, I've spent too long running from who we are. I'm done with that. I want to know our whole story, the good and the bad. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Oliver spoke again. At the graduation? When I introduced Amber as my mother? What were you going to do? Before everything came out? I smiled slightly. I was going to walk up, shake her hand, and say, I'm Holly Gagnon. I'm Oliver's mother. It's nice to meet you. Simple, dignified, but clear. Oliver laughed softly. That would have been perfect. I'm sorry you didn't get the chance. No, I said thoughtfully. What happened instead was better. Painful, but better. The truth finally came out. All of it. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of Riverside Community Hospital, watching the door nervously. I'd taken Amber's job offer and found I had a talent for organizing medical volunteers. Today was a milestone, the opening of a new clinic for low-income families. The door swung open, and Oliver walked in, wearing his white coat with Dr. Oliver Gagnon embroidered on the pocket. He'd decided to use my last name professionally, a choice that had brought tears to my eyes when he announced it. "Sorry I'm late," he said, hugging me. "Is everyone here?" "Just arrived." I nodded toward the corner where Richard and Amber were chatting with the hospital administrator. As we walked toward them, I marveled at how life had changed. The truth had been painful, but it had also set us free. Harrison was facing charges for fraud. Oliver was beginning his medical career with honest relationships surrounding him. And I had found a new purpose that honored my years of sacrifice, rather than erasing them. Amber spotted us and waved. "There they are, mother and son, the powerhouse team behind today's clinic opening." As cameras flashed to capture the moment, Oliver put his arm around me and proudly announced to everyone present, "This is my mother, Holly Gagnon. Everything I am today, I owe to her." And this time, no one questioned who I was. I had spent 65 years learning that life doesn't always give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you heartbreak, betrayal, and years of struggle. But sometimes, if you're persistent enough, brave enough to face the truth, it eventually gives you something better than you ever imagined. The recognition you deserve, the truth set free, and the knowledge that your sacrifices were not in vain. In the end, that's worth more than any graduation ceremony could ever acknowledge.